I'm Christian Wolmar, and this is the Calling All Stations podcast, being broadcast to you from a studio in Cambridge. And with me, as usual, is Mark Walker of Cogitamus. Mark, we've got quite a lot on our agenda today, as usual.
Hello, Christian. Great to be in the studio together here in Cambridge. Yes, we're going to be picking up the subject of low traffic neighbourhoods in an interview you've recorded with Councillor Emily Kerr, who is a leading Green councillor on Oxford City Council. Funnily enough, Oxford, where you ended up at the end of our previous episode after your trip on the Great Western Railway, but looking at a different aspect of Oxford this week. We're also going to be looking at innovative technology being deployed by Eurostar to enable more rapid boarding of their services by passengers through a new identification technology. As this is the end of season 1 of Calling All Stations, we're also going to reflect briefly on our journey so far and give the listeners a bit of a cliffhanger ending in readiness for season 2.
Great, yes, and I must say I was very taken with the forthcoming interview which you'll listen to, because Emily is particularly articulate about what has become a ridiculously controversial issue, low traffic neighbourhoods, and indeed, it's that sort of measure along with ULEZ, which also has attracted a lot of attention because of the Uxbridge by-election, whose result has just come through. And clearly I was on the doorstep in Uxbridge, and it was actually an issue, the implementation of the ultra-low emission zone, which means that people have to pay £12.50 to use certain old cars every day. And there is no doubt that this was an issue. And so these environmental measures continue to pose a problem for politicians who, across the board, politicians are committed to net zero, committed to implementing these measures, but then on the ground, when they try and implement them, they get into all sorts of issues and controversies and troubles. And this interview, which will now play, certainly highlights those aspects. Given the controversy about low traffic neighbourhoods and other measures to reduce car use, I thought I'd have a chat with Emily Kerr from Oxford Council, who's a long-time campaigner on these issues and indeed has done some research about this. Emily, you were rather taken aback by what our Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, said in the Daily Telegraph the other day about the fact that he didn't want to stop people using cars. He didn't want to ban cars. He was all in favour of freedom. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, he said that he felt that it was limiting people's freedom, etc. And I think there's a kind of a couple of problems with that, because firstly, it's not limiting people's freedom. It's limiting the ability of car drivers to shortcut through residential areas. So people that live in the residential areas are still able to access everywhere. In fact, everybody can still access everywhere. It's just that sometimes car drivers have to take a longer way round. And what that means is that you have actually more freedom for people who live in the area to walk, to feel safe, to take their children to school on bicycles, for older people who I speak to in my ward about who were previously nervous of the fast rat-running traffic, because there's a whole load of statistics on people that are cutting through somewhere to tend to go a lot faster, potentially drive a lot more dangerously. And so you end up with an increased amount of safety. And so it gives a whole group of people much more freedom than they had previously.
But why do you think the Tories have so gone on this whole anti-LTN idea, anti-ULEZ, anti-kind of any of these measures? I mean, why do you think they're doing this?
So I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it's what must be reflected in their polling data in marginal seats. I mean, I could go into a whole sort of diatribe about first past the post, but fundamentally what it means is that a few people of a certain demographic in certain seats, effectively the red wall seats, and probably swing voters, so they tend to often be, you know, men in their 50s and 60s, probably who've got a very traditional approach to driving and freedom, and those are the voters that both the Conservatives and Labour are appealing to. Now that is therefore not very reflective of the state of the rest of the country, of people, you know, we consistently see you know, people that want to be able to walk their kids to school, so young families. Women tend to drive less and tend to be more supportive of walking and cycling measures. But if that is not the very narrow demographic of people who the Conservative government is trying to win over, then that's not the messaging they're taking. So, you know, I can only assume that their polling data is showing them that this is the messaging they need to appeal to this particular narrow demographic of voter, and therefore that's what they're doing.
Now, in Oxford, there's been particular problems, or rather controversy over this. Just first of all, tell me a bit about you know, what has happened in Oxford. And you know, apparently, if one reads the Daily Mail, you're actually trying to ban people from travelling from one part of Oxford to another.
Yes, I mean, there's been this sort of fascinating 15-minute conspiracy theory that's kind of leapt up from late last year, you know, which nobody was really expecting, because it's essentially a town planning concept. That 15-minute cities is a town planning concept that says people should be able to walk to amenities within a 15-minute group of their house. That's how you should be planning towns. And so to have this turn into a kind of a global conspiracy theory, which happened essentially because after the Oxford traffic filters were announced, which is a concept of stopping private cars driving through the city centre at certain times of day. And, you know, we've had that in Oxford for 20 years, actually, because you can't drive on the high street and have not been allowed to for, as I say, a couple of decades. It's buses and taxis only, but it's extending that. It's putting that on a few more roads to give buses and taxis priority through the city centre. So, you know, this is a fairly old concept, but it's being rolled out. It's being extended. We're going to have it on a few more roads. And once that was heard about in the US, we had kind of leading right-wing figures in the US saying that this was, you know, meant that nobody was going to be allowed to leave their zone. And,
In the US?
So I think it's partly because Oxford is a globally famous city. So there were right-wing commentators in the US saying Oxford, England is going to ban people driving through. And that, of course, wasn't, you know, this wasn't happening. But I think somehow the recognition, the brand recognition of the Oxford name meant that this was something that got picked up by right-wing commentators, despite the fact that it's untrue, and therefore fit their own narrative. And the thing is that obviously in Oxford itself, people understand the details of the scheme, or at least they did once they did some research into it. But it's very easy to say that people in a random British city, if you're an American commentator, are having something imposed on them when you don't have any local experience, and most of your readership don't have any local experience of it either. So I think that was something that really happened, that they were able to message something that was a narrative about what was happening in Oxford, which wasn't happening in Oxford. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But so this actually went viral. It kind of went
completely.
across the world.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely, it went around the world. You know, we had comments on it from all over the English-speaking world, really, Australia, America, but it was particularly kicked off in America.
And at the Oxford level, you had some fairly heavy-looking demonstrations.
Yes, we particularly had one in February, ironically using the recently car-free Broad Street, which is, you know, one of England's most historic squares and had been a car park for many years. And the current administration had actually switched it away from being a car park. They've got rid of the car parking in the middle of it and made it into a lovely pedestrian space, ideal for demonstrations. So then we had a whole load of people, mostly from outside Oxford, descending on Oxford to protest this limitation of cars, but choosing to do this in a space where cars and car parking had previously been limited a couple of months earlier. So, you know, that was sort of ironic. And yeah, it was largely people that had come from outside Oxford to protest measures in Oxford, which were not what was happening. So it was a very kind of interesting, you know, coalition, these people that came in February.
I think interesting is a slight understatement there. I mean, it's slightly frightening, though, isn't it? I mean, did you experience sort of, you know, heavy-handed demonstrating against you personally or other councillors?
Yes, yeah, so, I mean, I think anybody that does anything to do with trying to make stuff better for walking and cycling, which necessitates making it less easy for cars, it almost definitely does. There's almost no circumstance where it doesn't. It receives death threats and the like on social media. I heard from Ghent's mayor that he had police protection for the first kind of 2 months that he implemented Ghent's circulation system, and that was a number of years ago now. It is a very sort of normal reaction. I don't think the presence of the kind of far right conspiracy theories made it any worse, but yes, certainly it's not very pleasant. But equally, it's a very small number of people. I think you really realise that are actually threatening. It's the same people again and again. It's people that are not interested in data or rational argument. They're just interested in making threats. So, did it feel particularly kind of unpleasant to have a lot of people coming from all over the city to demonstrate in Oxford? To a degree, yes, but it also was just a bit ridiculous. I mean, the people didn't understand what was happening. Like they were protesting anti-vaxxers, they were protesting the World Economic Forum, they were saying that Klaus Schwab was trying to take over the world with his global elite. There was a lot of anti-Semitic messaging. There was a lot of things in the demonstration that were just manifestly untrue. And so I think that helped local people realise that whilst they might have perfectly valid objections, their agenda was being hijacked by a group of people who were pushing an overall fairly right-wing freedom narrative that was misleading and kind of not based in reality.
Oh, you're wonderfully sanguine about this, I must say, Emily. But so you're suggesting there that some of the local people started disassociating themselves from some of this madder stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, it was obviously reported really extensively in our local press. And I think, when you see the signs that say, vaccines kill and the far right is, the World Economic Forum is taking over the world and this kind of stuff, a lot of people know that's not true. So then they start to question whether the council is really trying to deliberately restrict their freedom of movement, or maybe there might be some other rationale to what's happening. And then it means that I think people did a lot more research on what was actually happening and then became much more accepting of what the rationale was. And I'm optimistic that it meant people spent a bit more time understanding what was going on rather than just reacting negatively to it.
So a few months on from this, it has quietened down, but are the schemes going through? Have people retrenched, or where are we at with it? I know the main street is now pedestrianised, isn't it? You mentioned.
Yes, exactly.
And I've cycled down it a month or so ago, and I must say, the centre of Oxford was somewhat transformed by that. So has it largely won through?
So I definitely say the Broad Street pedestrianisation, which initially had a lot of resistance, there's almost none now. I mean, most people now think it's a really great thing. And I think, we see that often with traffic schemes. You see it with, congestion charges, anything. People resist a change. Once the change has happened, a few weeks after, they get used to new habits and then they tend to like it. So Broad Street, definitely positive. I'd say the low traffic neighbourhoods, which is a second scheme, and that's very much in my ward. Again, there was always support for the low traffic neighbourhoods, and there was always opposition as well, but net support was generally a lot higher. There were also a lot of people that were neutral. I think that's probably, there's been a slight increase in support. We haven't had the data back from the latest survey, but that's what you'd expect to see. It's what you see consistently elsewhere in general. And I'd say the traffic filters, this scheme of extending where private cars can't drive during the day, it's been delayed for other reasons in Oxford. There's been a railway bridge remodelling, which has, required that gets pushed back till 2024.
Yeah, you'll be rebuilding a railway station, and they've blocked off the road there. Yes, I was in Oxford the other day, and
yes, exactly.
It's fairly chaotic, but yes.
Exactly. So that's delayed the introduction of the traffic filters to 2024 anyway. So I think there's been very much no objection to them, because people are waiting to see what happens and exactly when that comes in and exactly what the decision has been made. So yeah, the traffic filters have certainly gone very quiet.
Right. So you've been looking at some research. I saw that because we got yet another survey saying that actually LTNs are quite popular, and you looked at other research on this, and what did you actually find?
Yeah, so basically what I did is I looked up all of the representative polling surveys on low traffic neighbourhoods that I could find. And the reason that that's important, the reason it's important to look up representative polling is that there's a lot of consultations that councils do, and that just allows anybody to comment, and they have been inundated with comments from people that do not live in the area to try and either say, yes, these are brilliant, we should have them, or no, they're rubbish, we shouldn't have them. And so it's definitely happening on both sides of the debate. But what you then end up with is people gaming the consultations in order to try and say that there's massive opposition or that there's massive support. And to be fair to many councils, they use the same consultation software or same programs for everything that they do. So normally they might be consulting on, the moving of a lamppost or a bin or something that genuinely only local people respond to. And what they haven't really expected is the massive response from across the country and indeed the world that they get on these particular traffic consultations.
So the software does not enable you to focus on just local people, because anonymity of email addresses, presumably. So they can't just say only people in so and so ward can contribute.
Exactly. So generally, right, they ask you where you live, but you can just you can just lie. You can just say you live somewhere that you don't live. So it's not a very sophisticated system, and it doesn't need to be, or from almost all consultations that the councils do. Nobody fills them in that doesn't live in the local area. They are very effective. However, it turns out that as traffic has become this kind of culture war issue, that lots of people are gaming the system. And that is why representative polling is so important. So representative polling, as you know, takes a sample of people that are representative of the local area and asks them questions, and then gives a fairly accurate kind of view of opinions. And so, again, as you probably know, whenever you do one study, there might be reasons for it, giving kind of data that maybe isn't incredibly accurate. Data, exactly. There's always a reason that you can criticise any study on anything. And that's why it's really important to look at a whole series of studies in order to see if they kind of say the same thing, or maybe they say very different things. So what you can see. So I pulled together representative polling from the UK in the last 5 years, specifically on LTNs. And there were sort of, I think, 9 or 10 different polls. And actually, since then, I've had another 3 that I didn't know about that people have told me about. So I'm going to update the research. But I think overwhelmingly what you see is that people like LTNs. And that's true whether they're in an area that's had LTNs or, across London where there are some LTNs, people know about them, but they may not live directly nearby to one. But, it is most people in general like LTNs, and there's a massive proportion of people that either don't know or aren't very bothered. And we really don't hear about that group of people very much.
This is universal across the board, is it? That these polls tend to show that people like the idea when they're actually affected by it one way or the other. They're kind of, they're representational, so they live somewhere near or in the area.
Exactly. And I've actually just found a poll which is very much more 50-50 split. So, positive and negative are pretty much equal. And so that was not a poll I'd looked at originally, but it's an outlier, because in general, you see people supporting them 3 times as much as opposing them.
3 times as much. 3 times as much.
Exactly. So it's normally about 60% support and 15 to 20% opposition. In Oxford, it was about 60% support and about 30% opposition. So that's a kind of a swing. That's 2 times as much supporting. That's massively less support, but still twice as many people supporting as opposing. And as I just mentioned, I've since found another poll where it's more or less equal. But again, most of the time, most people, it's about a 3-to-1 ratio. So, that's a really consistent pattern that we've seen in any of the representative polling. Essentially, there is overwhelmingly support for LTNs from most people.
Okay, well, 2 things out of it. One is that anti-LTN people will say, oh, these are not accurate. They're carried out by academics who are party-free. And secondly, a slightly more difficult issue is that the people who are badly affected by this might say we are much more badly affected than people are helped by it. So the antis can say, well, this has really wrecked our lives. I can't get to my grandmother or whatever. So what do you say about those 2 points? First of all, about the anti-LTN argument that these are skewed polls.
Yes, I mean, so I think that's an interesting point. I would argue that while some research, more quantitative research, is done by academics, these polls are done by polling firms. We are talking about Kantar, Ipsos, YouGov, firms that, are not in any way biased by one perspective or another. They're not academics. They don't have a point of view. They have a polling methodology. That's what they use to understand which way people are going to vote, and they apply that to any question. So some of these have been commissioned by the Department for Transport, some of them have been commissioned by Transport for London, but they're all very independent surveys. So I think that's really important to emphasise. It is not realistic to suggest that a firm like Kantar has a bias either pro or against LTNs, because they simply don't. Okay. So that would be how I'd argue the first one. On the second one, I think a lot of people opposed underestimate how much people care or haven't considered that, just how important children's safety is to a lot of parents. I mean, I have seen a child on my street disabled for life by a rat-running driver. I can assure you that there's almost nothing worse than that. Yes, it takes some people longer to visit their grandmothers, but I would argue that watching a child grow up disabled because they've been hit by a car, I really can't think of much that's actually worse than that. And that wouldn't have happened on the road I grew up in if it hadn't been a rat running place, if drivers hadn't been speeding through it. Had I lived in an LTN, that child would not have had that experience. So, I understand that LTNs cause some people problems. I understand that they cause traffic to be, cause journeys to be longer for some people. I really do. And I know that that's not great for a lot of people, but really, the downsides of having speeding traffic cut through residential areas are also extremely significant.
That's a fantastically strong point to end on. But just as a last question, so, I've written about this and looked at events across the country, and you do repeatedly see in places like Wakefield and Ealing and other places where they put in LTNs and withdrawn them because of the kind of pressures that you're talking about. So how do you advise people who are trying to implement these schemes, trying to put them in, and yet find this kind of initial kind of flood of opposition? How do you counter that?
So I would love councils to commission representative polling, and I think I'd love them to say what the process is going to be. So I think consultation is extremely useful to get details of what is and isn't working about LTNs, because obviously not all LTNs are perfect. They're a bit like traffic lights, right? Some traffic lights, everyone could think so generally a pretty good idea, but some of them are badly placed or have bad timings or whatever. That they're not saying that traffic lights are all great. I'm not saying that all LTNs are great. They need to be well designed, and we need to take local on the ground feedback in order to change them. So I suppose what I'd really advise councillors and officers installing LTNs would be to do a detailed consultation on what people feel about them, but not to make that a do you support or oppose consultation, because that encourages gaming, as we've talked about. Separately, they should do representative polling from an independent firm that understands how local people feel about it. Because if they put as part of the consultation a question about oppose or support, they will definitely get bad faith actors on both sides of the debate completing it. So I think that's sort of a really important thing. Secondly, I would really encourage people to read the data, the literature. The government's written a whole load, the DfT has written a whole load of things about LTNs that aren't just the headline in the Telegraph that the Minister for Transport is saying. And actually, there's a lot of really thoughtful, considered research and reports. And I think councillors, on an issue that is as important to their constituents as low traffic neighbourhoods on both sides of the debate, really do owe it to their constituents to look up the data, to understand the research, to not fold under pressure when they don't have a strong view. And I think the academic research is pretty overwhelming on it, which is why I believe that many of our councillors in Oxford continue to support them, simply because a lot of us have done a lot of research on the topic and really do genuinely understand the benefits.
Okay, that's absolutely fabulous and fascinating, Emily. Thank you so much for doing that.
Christian, you were at St Pancras International the other day as a guest of Eurostar for a briefing on their Smart Check system, which is just being introduced for the more rapid boarding of their trains by passengers using innovative technology. And I believe you spoke to Gwendoline Cazenave, who's Chief Executive of Eurostar, Gareth Williams, who is their General Secretary and Chief Strategic Partnerships Officer, and also Andrew Budd from iProov, who are the technology provider. Tell us more.
Yes, well, we had a conversation, which you'll hear in a minute, and I think there is actually something quite exciting about this technology, and we also got some information about the future of Eurostar and how it's going. So here's the interview. So tell me about this system, because obviously it's been long in the development. I've written about this many times about what a hassle it is and whatever. So tell me about how long has this been in development?
Well, the first thing maybe to say is that this technology is key for us because in the perspective of improving the customer experience at St Pancras, improving the capacity of the station, we have, I would say, many parts, many subjects to deal with, and iProov was part of the solution. It is part of the solution of the customer experience at St Pancras and part of the growing capacity. So I don't know, maybe you know better than I, but when the idea became, because now my main challenge, the main challenge of Eurostar Group now is to grow capacity between big cities and with a good, and I would say an amazing, when it's possible, customer experience. So Smart Check is a part of this project, growing capacity of stations. It's also growing staff from border police, investing in e-gates, on the automated gates. So it's it's a large, I would say, project.
I see it's a problem.
And I know that Smart Check began a few years ago, before COVID.
We've been actually talking with Eurostar about this concept for about the last 7 years.
7 years.
Yeah.
We started building the first proof of concept systems just before COVID, at the beginning of 2020. Timing could not have been more remarkable. Fast forward, the proof of concept was successfully completed at the beginning of 2022, and since then we've then developed that. We learned a great deal about what needed to be improved, and over the last year and a half we've developed the technology to the point at which it's now in production.
Okay, so tell me who's going to be using it. This is just for business passengers, is it?
I would say maybe before that, as we have a very big challenge about growth, about our project of building the backbone of sustainable travel in Europe, it's really key for us to be innovative, to show that we are finding solutions, we are finding different, and that's why I was not there when the project was launched. But it's for us it's great, and it's key to show that we are innovative. We show that seamless crossing borders and automated cross borders is not science fiction. We can do it.
Despite Brexit.
I mean, whatever. In the situation where we are now, the situation at St Pancras, the situation of a very strong willingness to travel for all the European, British and European customers. So for us, it's really key to show that we are part of innovation. First of all, because it allows to have a very good customer experience at St Pancras for the moment for our customers. And second, to show that we are pushing solutions. Eurostar Group is pushing solutions in the perspective of ES, when we talk to other governments about border polices in France, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, when we talk to the European, to the EU. So it's really both on the very St. Pancras innovative new solution to cross-border, but also to show that we are innovating, we push for solutions, and we push in the global environment where we are now in the new Europe.
Okay, so how will this work? Because will this work for everybody eventually? This is only for business at the moment.
At the moment, we already had 150 customers who crossed the border for
with SmartCheck.
With SmartCheck, and they said they were really happy with it.
Right.
So it's strong, high level technology innovation. So now we begin with BP and Carte Blanche.
Right.
We'll see, because also, I mean, it's
BP being
also
business
premier. Sorry,
yeah.
it's
not a petrol company.
No,
Okay.
not British Petroleum.
Right. Yeah.
And we will offer this possibility to the customers, and we'll see how they deal with it, how they react. For the moment, the 150, we knew they would be okay because they had already been part of the first trial. So it's a step-by-step process.
Yeah.
Yes, this is the first step. Maybe
I think
Gareth.
it's part of the innovation. You're seeing how customers respond to something that is completely new and innovative. That ability just to walk past and complete those processes, but also, as Gwendoline says, it's showing governments that the technology is here, it's robust, it works, it's the kind of thing that can be built on. And I think if you look back, you were talking about how long has it been in development. I think over that period, two things have changed. One is the thinking of governments and their openness to this technology. We were deliberately, with iProov and their partner Entrust, using the same technology that was used 4 million times, 5 million times for the EU enrolment system. So it was trusted by the Home Office, it had been proved, it had been demonstrated, and it was aligned with what they had produced as their future strategy. So that's thinking. And then the technology has evolved. If you go back even to the proof of concept last year, it was still a system where you had to walk up, stop, smile at the camera, wait for your clearance, and go. Now, up to 4 people at once can just walk.
Yes, I was impressed with that. I just walked through it, and it showed a picture of me.
And they recognized you.
We were saying, an early test of the technology was day one. We had a pair of identical twins.
Right.
But theoretically, so it is in theory. So if you had 4 people walk through all at once, and kept doing that, that one podium has the same capacity as the whole of the rest of the station.
Wow.
So potentially it is something that can be really innovative, really beneficial to customers, and demonstrate to governments this can work.
So when are you going to roll it out for the other passengers?
Depends on how it works. If it works, we'll see in a few months. So it's a step-by-step innovating process. So it's of course about the other passengers, but it's also about the way you cross borders all over Europe in the Eurostar group environment, which is key as well. So it's part of the global customer experience we are building at the moment with the border police authorities, with the stations. So there are many parts of the global project to make the best customer experience as we can, and to grow capacity.
Will it help you restore Ebbsfleet and Ashford? That's a big question, because I think a lot of people in Southeast are kind of slightly miffed that they can't get their train. So will this actually help?
The question of Ashford and Ebbsfleet is the decision made to not to stop in Ashford and Ebbsfleet anymore has been a very difficult decision for Eurostar. And the situation is that now, from a financial, from an operational, and from a customer experience perspective, we cannot reopen Ashford and Ebbsfleet at the moment. Why? Because if we would reopen Ashford and Ebbsfleet now, we would need to send resources, and I mean mostly border police officers, to Ashford and Elfleet, which would reduce by 20% the capacity of St Pancras. It means less. It would reduce by 4,000 between 4 and 5,000 customers in St Pancras
A day.
And Ashford and Elfleet was around 1,000. So at the moment, it's not an option because we're not yet on a seamless, without queues, border crossing at St Pancras. We have another hurdle, a coming hurdle, I would say, which is EES implementation, which is a great project as well. We don't know the date exactly. It should be 2024, post-Olympics, but and then
This is the European
European entry and exit Schengen system. Schengen,
Right. Yeah.
you see well. And then this EES will need to implement 24 registration kiosks at St Pancras. It means that UK and non-EU customers will have to pre-register at this kiosk, then cross the border. So the whole capacity implementation, ability to grow the capacity at St Pancras is not yet finished. We are facing challenges. We are working with authorities. We are facing challenges. So at the moment, we could not afford reopen, Ashford and Elfleet for this question.
Right.
After that, the question, of course, will be reopened. But one thing is really important to say: we are not letting customers without a solution. Ashford and Elfleet customers can come to St Pancras and then take the train to cross the channel.
Yes, of course, but it's kind of not the same. So this new European system, is that going to cause further delays? And does Smart Check part of the solution to this?
The thing is, now we are operating in a new environment.
Right.
Eurostar Group, so Eurostar plus Thalys, which is now a big company with a European, footprint, is operating in a new situation. Post-Brexit, post-COVID, post-pandemic, and now we have EES, which is true. It is putting pressure on the system. And there are many customers. The growth of traffic is amazing, both on British European markets and also overseas market. If you see, just in June this year, we had plus 20% of American customers. So globally, the market is really growing high. That's why also we have a growth strategy on the global Eurostar group. So yes, we are facing challenges. And what we are doing we've been doing since years, but since 10 months I've been a Eurostar CEO, is to work hard with iProov for Smart Check, with governments, with French border police, with UK border police, Belgian ones, with station management, HS1 at St Pancras, SNCB at Brussels, SNCF Gare et Connexion in Paris. So it's really to make the conditions to find the solutions. And when you are with the stakeholders around the table, you find solutions. If we talk about Amsterdam, I'm sure you heard about what happened in Amsterdam.
Yeah, you're now closed for a year.
They had said we're going to close the terminal for a year because we need to close it for works.
Right.
Well, I went to Amsterdam. I went to The Hague to say, okay, it's not possible from a Eurostar perspective. It's not possible for a British and Dutch customer perspective because they want to travel in a sustainable way. So let's sit around the table and see what could be the solution, what compromise we could find.
So what's happened?
So we just appointed the four of us, Eurostar Group, the Dutch government, ProRail, the network, and NS. The four of us, we appointed a railways expert, a neutral one, a Swiss one, which is, I don't know if you know them.
Neutral as you can get.
Yes, right,
as neutral as you can get.
Yes.
So we co-appointed them, and they are currently working on assessing the situation, making a diagnosis of the work, the phasing, the way they, and so on, and they should give us the report, I would say, mid-September, and say, okay, here is the compromise we could say, we could find, here are the solutions or not solutions, and so on.
When is it scheduled to close, Amsterdam? The
June
station?
24.
Oh, not for not. Oh, right.
So
you've got some
but
time
I'm
to sort
still,
it out.
Yes,
Right.
we have time to sort it out.
Right.
We have a very strong, I would say, from all the stakeholders, a really strong willingness to find a solution. We have the better Swiss experts, so we are always on the side of solutions.
Right.
So
Okay.
I'm optimistic, I would say, if I can say.
One of the oddities of the station is that you have this vast area where you arrive that is completely underused, and you have this terribly congested departure lounge. Have you tried to work out how to make use of that space?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
That's well, we are in the beginning of a process of thinking about what could be, because as you can imagine, 30 million passengers in 2030 needs, as I say, to push the walls in stations, and St Pancras is our biggest stations because it is the station where all our trains, Eurostar, the cross-channel trains depart. So we really need to find more space. And yes, you're right, this space in front of those trains is a space which could be, used. And at the moment, we are working hard with HS1 on the current situation. We are working hard to implement the 24 ES kiosks. And currently, 38% of the station is used for cross-border operations. So yes, we're working with HS1 on the future project to grow the capacity.
Because I've had a session with this ever since the station was opened about all the unused space.
You're right. It is known as Project SPICE, the St Pancras International Capacity Enhancement. And the plan has been sitting there for a while, but it's why that pricing review becomes so important, because we need to create the commercial headroom that gives us the opportunity to invest in the station.
Okay, let's hope it happens.
So you're really struck by this initiative, Christian?
Yes, look, I mean, it takes something to impress me in terms of technology, because so much of it either doesn't work or isn't particularly impressive. But this was really very different, because I downloaded the app, which was quite easy, and then downloaded the information into the app, which was really interesting, because you could hold your passport against your phone and it would read the chip in your passport and download all that boring information that you have to put about expiry date and the number of the passport and date of birth, all in one go, all in there straight away into this app. And then you actually scan in a ticket, the ticket that you've been given, and then it lets you through the barriers straight away, and you just walk through. You don't even stop, and it flashes up a picture of yourself, which is the picture that's obviously embedded in the app, and you just go straight through. And I'm told that you can get up to 4 people at a time going through without stopping. And this is, at last the railway is doing something really innovative, something that's actually in advance of anything you get in the aviation industry. It's taken 7 years to get this far, but once this is rolled out properly, it might well help the situation at St Pancras, where it is really chocker. And indeed, on the day I went, it was absolutely jam-packed. So a bit of good news and a bit of new tech from the rail industry.
This is the final episode from season 1 of Calling All Stations with Christian Wolmar, but by no means the end of Calling All Stations, because we expect to be back in September with season 2, with some new ideas, issues and themes to present to our listeners. But I think, Christian, we'd very much like to thank everybody who's listened in and downloaded over the last 7 months since we first launched on the 14th of December has helped us, in some cases, actually make headlines in other media with our content, and we're looking forward to coming back in the autumn.
Yes, I must say I've been delighted by the number of listeners we've been getting, the stories we've broken, the fact that guests are always delighted to come on our podcast, and we've had great guests across the board. All sorts of people are happy to share their thoughts with us. We've had a lot of very positive feedback, and what started as maybe a kind of initiative that we didn't quite know where it's going, I think we now have a real direction of travel. We want to build this up. There isn't anything else like this. There's no other podcast covering across the board transport. There are odd ones on railways or whatever, but nothing kind of really that takes in the generality of the transport industry. And with our new features, which will be quite newsy and different, and we're going to kind of improve the music, which I think is a good thing, and make other kind of changes, which we hope will really help calling all stations to, as it were, take off, to use an aviation expression.
So, like all first seasons, we have to end with a cliffhanger. So here, for the last time this season, is Christian's final thought from the departure lounge.
Well, I've taken the view that it really seems that the Department for Transport is trying to stop people from using the railway. So we had the story that we actually released, which was on how they wanted to rein back on Wi-Fi and not bother providing Wi-Fi for passengers. Then, of course, covered in our last episode, the booking office fiasco, actually suggesting that 1,000 ticket offices across the country should be closed down, including Euston, Birmingham, New Street and Manchester, and all sorts of other big offices. Absolutely kind of insane. And so the question is, at the end, when we come back in September, will there be anybody using the railways if they put people off in this way? And indeed, will there even be a railway network left if they continue in this vein?
Calling All Stations with Christian Wolmar is a Cogitamus Limited production. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do also follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @AllStationsPod.